Welcome back to our channel. What if I told you that the pennies sitting in your drawer dated 1940, 1941, or 1942 could be worth way more than just 1 cent? These humble coins were minted during the edge of war, and some carry secrets collectors are desperately hunting for. From rare mint marks to jaw-dropping errors, these weak pennies have stories that can turn small change into serious cash. Before you toss that coin or spend it, wait. You might be holding a hidden gem. Like if you're curious, and subscribe if you're ready to dive into the world of valuable coins. Let's start. Why 1940? Welcome back to our channel. In the heart of 1974, America stood at a peculiar intersection. The echoes of Watergate murmured through every newspaper, while a post-Vietnam haze lingered in the air. Inflation crept into households, the oil crisis gnawed at the nation's mobility, and amid this turbulence, the U.S. Mint continued its duty steadfast, predictable, mechanical. Coins poured from the presses in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Among these, the Washington quarter remained a staple, a carryover from the 1932 design mint to commemorate George Washington's 200th birthday. By 1974, the design had become so familiar it faded into the background of daily transactions, until something unexpected slipped through. Minted from a copper-nickel-clad composition since 1965, the 1974 quarter should have been just another face in the crowd. Its specifications were routine: 24.3 millimeters in diameter, weighing 5.67 grams. Its obverse featuring John Flanagan enduring bust of Washington, the reverse still boasting the heraldic eagle, wings spread with stoic assurance. Yet deep within the relentless stamping rhythm of the mint's machines, a rare misstep occurred, one that escaped notice for decades. No alarm bells, no mint reports. Just a subtle deviation buried among millions. Years passed. Circulation wore smooth the cheeks of presidents and dimmed the details of eagles. Pockets emptied into cash registers, laundromats, vending machines. The world changed, but the quarters soldiered on. Among collectors, the 1974 edition held no particular prestige. It was common, after all, minted in the hundreds of millions. But rarity doesn't always trumpet its arrival. Sometimes, it whispers quietly, waiting for the right eyes to see. In a dusty basement in Ohio, decades later, a seasoned collector named Harold Keller sifted through a forgotten lot of circulated coins he'd bought from a closing pawn shop. He wasn't expecting treasure, just the familiar pulse of numismatic nostalgia. His magnifying glass hovered lazily, habit more than hope guiding his gaze. One coin clinked onto the tray, a 1974 quarter. It looked like countless others. But when light glanced across its surface, something resisted. The rim shimmered oddly, like the edge wasn't flush. Harold leaned in. The coin was thicker than usual. Barely, but noticeably. And the color under the nicked surface, there was no telltale copper hue where should have exposed the core. Suspicion prickled up his spine. He flipped it again and again, registering the weight in his palm. Slightly off. The edge, was it readed as cleanly as the others? No. The ridges looked faint, worn not by time, but born that way. He set it aside, heart starting to pound in his chest. A test with a neodymium magnet confirmed what he feared to believe. The quarter was magnetic, but how? No modern U.S. quarter was magnetic. That would imply a different composition, possibly steel. And steel hadn't been used in American coinage since the emergency wartime sense of 1943. His fingers trembled as he checked the date again. 1974. Clear as daylight. He contacted a metallurgist friend. A non-destructive XRF analysis confirmed his suspicion. The coin was struck on a steel blank. Steel. In 1974. This shouldn't have existed. Theories blossomed. Perhaps a foreign planchet intended for another denomination or another nation had accidentally slipped into the quarter press. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was a test strike, an internal mint experiment never meant to circulate. The early 70s were a time of economic reevaluation, after all. Could it have been part of a materials study? But if so, how had it escaped? News of the find spread quietly at first. Only whispers among trusted collector circles. Harold didn't announce it online or seek instant fame. He studied, corresponded, compared. More questions than answers swirled. No other 1974 steel quarter was known to exist. Could his be the only one? Auction houses made discreet inquiries. They offered numbers Harold couldn't ignore, yet still he hesitated. The coin had become a mystery he wasn't ready to part with. But as time passed, curiosity outpaced caution. He submitted the coin to PCGS for authentication. Weeks later, the verdict arrived. Authentic. Mint error. Struck on a foreign planchet likely intended for a coin used in Central America, one that required magnetic properties. The coin community buzzed with excitement. Numismatic publications featured Harold's discovery. Experts speculated whether the mint had inadvertently struck a handful of experimental quarters using leftover blanks, or if a rogue blank had found its way into a press. Either way, it was real. And it was alone. No duplicates emerged. No mint records surfaced. The coin's value was fluid at first. Private offers climbed steadily: $3,000, then $7,000, then $15,000. Each bid higher than the last, driven not just by rarity, but by the story. A ghost of minting history had slipped through unnoticed for decades. But Harold still clung to it. It wasn't about the money yet. The coin toured briefly, encased in protective plastic, drawing lines of eager eyes at coin shows. Dealers and historians debated its origins. Some believed it marked the tail end of a quiet material transition study the mint abandoned. Others believed it was a mistake, simple but miraculous. Yet every theory shared one constant. This coin was unique. As years passed, the market changed. Coins once prized lost value, others soared. But Harold's steel 1974 quarter held firm. Its price followed a strange curve, plateauing at $$20,000, then surging again after a brief television appearance brought it to a wider audience. A televised segment on minting anomalies featured it as the closing story, an American mint mystery. Afterward, offers resumed. $32,000. Then $45,000. But it wasn't until a quiet meeting in Baltimore that the tide truly turned. At a numismatic symposium, a former mint employee, now retired and well into his 80s, approached Harold after his presentation. He wore a faded blazer and bore the easy calm of someone with nothing left to prove. "That coin?" he said softly. "I think I remember it." Harold blinked. "You do?" The man nodded. "In '74, there were tests. We had surplus planchets from overseas contracts. I can't tell you everything. I was in QA, not production. But I remember seeing quarters struck on strange metal, steel, even brass. They weren't supposed to go anywhere. Maybe one slipped through." He paused. "And if it did, it wasn't a mistake." That revelation changed everything. The narrative around the coin shifted. No longer a random error, it might have been a prototype. A test of alternative compositions during economic uncertainty. The mint, after all, faced increasing costs in the early 70s. Copper prices had risen. Nickel too. Was this coin a glimpse into a path not taken? Auction interest reignited. The coin's value spiked. A private collector in Texas offered $68,000. Harold declined. Then $80,000. Still, he waited. But when a museum approached him, a permanent exhibit on U.S. minting anomalies, they didn't offer cash. They offered legacy. A permanent story. A name plaque. Preservation. Harold considered it for weeks. Then he agreed, but not before the final twist. Just days before the transfer, Harold returned to the pawn shop's original coin lot, still boxed in his basement. He hadn't touched it in years. Curiosity gnawed at him. He pulled tray after tray, checking each 1974 quarter with new eyes. Near the bottom, stuck to the back of a dusty envelope, he found a second one. This coin was less pristine. Scratched, dull, overlooked before. But under analysis it was steel. It was magnetic. It bore the same anomaly. It wasn't alone after all. But this second coin, this one, had a twist of its own. It wasn't just struck on a foreign planchet. It was off-center. A dual error. Steel planchet, off-center strike. Incredibly rare. Possibly unique. The news dropped like a coin into a well rippling outward. Harold's single treasure was now a pair. And the pair, well, their story had just begun. As 1974 quarters continued to clink unnoticed in drawers and jars across America, collectors now watch more closely. Not just for steel, but for signs of error, of anomaly, of history's quiet slip-ups. What once was mundane now carries mystery. And for Harold, the question lingers, quiet but unshakable. The year was 1981. A period of shifting winds in American society. Ronald Reagan had just taken office, promising a new direction for the nation. The economy was in flux, inflation high, unemployment climbing, and tensions with the Soviet Union thick in the air. The nation teetered between uncertainty and hope. In the background of this political and economic theater, the U.S. Mint continued its quiet but crucial work, producing millions of coins each day. Among them was the Washington quarter, a design that had been in circulation nearly 50 years, reliable, overlooked, unnoticed. The Washington quarter of 1981 wasn't special on the surface. Over 1.1 billion quarters were minted that year, near identical pieces rolling out of facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The coin retained its traditional composition of a copper core clad in a nickel alloy, producing that characteristic silvery sheen. Nothing unusual was expected. But machines, no matter how refined, make mistakes. And sometimes, those mistakes take years to surface. At a small coin shop in Sacramento, a mid-level collector named Riley Abbott was sifting through a bulk bag of circulated quarters. It was routine. He was hunting for varieties, minor double dies, off-center strikes, transitional planchets. His work was methodical, almost meditative. The coins slipped between his fingers in a rhythm, some discarded instantly, others held briefly, then tossed aside. But one coin slowed him. A 1981 quarter. The obverse bore Washington's profile as always. But the rim seemed wrong. It looked thicker on one side than the other. He turned it slowly. The lettering along the edge of Liberty pressed too close to the rim. On the reverse, the eagle's wings appeared slightly clipped. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to set off alarm bells in Riley's mind. He grabbed his digital caliper. Diameter, slightly under 24.3 mm. Weight, 5.50 grams. Slightly off. He picked up a magnet. The coin didn't react, so it wasn't steel or foreign. But it felt different. The coin's edge was missing most of its reading. Those familiar grooves were absent on one side, smoothed over, as though the coin had been pressed out of alignment. His fingers tightened. This wasn't an ordinary error. It had the hallmarks of a rare misalignment, a broad strike error. Riley sent photos to a fellow numismatist. The reply came quickly. Get that thing authenticated. He submitted the coin to NGC. The wait was excruciating. Days stretched like weeks. When the email finally arrived, his heart pounded. Genuine. Broad strike. With a slight off-center shift, an ultra-rare double error on a business strike. 1981 Washington quarter. What made it significant was context. 1981 was the final year before a temporary halt in minting coins for circulation with the S Mint mark. The San Francisco Mint, which had already shifted to proof coin production, had seen a few transitional quirks in 1981. There were whispers that some of the presses were adjusted improperly, causing rare broad-struck pieces to slip through before corrections were made. The speculation now had a face. Riley's coin. But it wasn't just the error that drew attention, it was its survival. A coin that should have been caught, rejected, and melted had endured. It had circulated lightly but somehow remained in surprisingly good condition. The strike was weak on one side, but the surfaces showed minimal wear. -55 Australian dollars, the grader said. Riley brought the coin to a regional coin show. Interest surged. Veteran collectors and dealers took turns inspecting it under magnification. One dealer, clearly seasoned, whispered that he'd only seen one other example of a similar 1981 error in his 40 years. But that one had a clean strike, no off-center shift. Riley's coin was a hybrid. The coin's value wasn't immediately clear. Broad strikes on quarters aren't unheard of. But broad strikes with off-center elements on a coin from 1981 with low public interest created a market anomaly. Offers trickled in. One for $1,800. Another, bolder, at $2, $600. But Riley declined. He dug deeper, exploring auction archives. An extremely rare 1981 D broad strike had fetched $3,800 at auction in 2019, but it lacked the off-center feature. Another 1981 quarter, with only a faint misalignment, had gone for $1,200 just 2 years before. The pattern was forming. Riley's coin existed at the crossroads of rarity and intrigue. Months passed. Online chatter picked up. Forums debated whether the mint had experienced a mechanical alignment issue in 1981 at one of its facilities. Some even wondered aloud if the error might be part of a short-lived misfeed batch that had never been properly documented. Then came the twist. A collector from Maryland reached out to Riley. He claimed to have something nearly identical. He sent photographs, a 1981 quarter with an unmistakable broad strike and the same off-center warping. The two coins matched almost perfectly, down to the strike weakness along Washington's jawline. It wasn't a one-off anymore. Riley arranged to meet him at a coin conference in Chicago. They brought both coins under the eyes of experts. Side by side, the pair told a different story. This wasn't a single freak error. It was likely part of a brief, unknown minting event. Maybe a single batch less than a dozen coins, struck during a misaligned press run. Only 2 had surfaced. But the fact that they had both survived gave weight to the theory. Riley's coin was no longer just rare, it was part of a micro-minting mystery. Dealers reevaluated. New offers came in. $6, $500. Then $9,000. The Maryland collector, after much back and forth, sold his coin quietly to a private buyer. Riley, however, held firm. He decided to keep his coin for now. But in late 2024, he was approached by a major auction house preparing a curated event on U.S. mint anomalies. They wanted his coin as the capstone of their Washington quarter section. After consideration, he agreed to consign it with a reserve price. When the gavel finally fell that night, the final price shocked even seasoned collectors. $17, $300. A 1981 Washington quarter once worth 25 cents, forgotten in change jars, and soda machines had rewritten its story. Not through celebrity or metal content, but by a misstep in machinery, a momentary flaw immortalized in silver alloy. It was a reminder that value, like history, sometimes hides in plain sight, waiting to be found by eyes patient enough to look beyond the surface. In 1998, the United States Mint was preparing to close one of its longest-standing chapters. The familiar Washington quarter, which had graced the obverse of the 25-cent piece since 1932, was about to give way to something revolutionary. The upcoming state quarters program would forever change the landscape of modern American coinage. But in that final year before the transition, amid the immense volume of quarters being produced at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, something unusual occurred, something that wouldn't be noticed for years. More than 1.2 billion quarters were struck that year. These coins bore the standard John Flanagan design, George Washington's profile on the obverse, a stoic eagle on the reverse, perched with wings outstretched. The 1998 quarters were supposed to be unremarkable, routine, simply another iteration before the dramatic change that would follow. But transitions have a habit of stirring up dust. Testing for new dyes and experimenting with planchets quietly took place behind closed doors. In the shadows of this production frenzy, a handful of quarters emerged different. Subtly, almost invisibly so. One of them found its way to a flea market table in upstate New York nearly a decade later, resting among dog-eared books and vintage pins. Robert Kellner, a retired machinist and casual collector, had long been drawn to the texture and geometry of coins. He appreciated them not just for their history, but for their craftsmanship. It was a habit of his to browse through coin lots with a jeweler's loupe, not expecting to find treasure, but enjoying the quiet satisfaction of a close look. He picked up a worn plastic bag marked $5 in quarters and poured the contents into his palm. As he fanned the coins across the table, one caught the light just a little differently. It didn't shine the way clad coins should. The surface was soft, almost velvety. The edges were reeded, yes, but with a slightly shallow bite. He flipped it. The eagle, so familiar in posture, looked oddly recessed, and the fields around it lacked the usual luster. His fingers paused. There was something else, a faint doubling in the letters of "In God We Trust." Not the telltale flatness of machine doubling, but subtle, rounded contours. Genuine doubling. Robert purchased the entire bag without hesitation and spent the evening under his desk lamp, rotating the quarter again and again. There was a dull, satin finish across the entire coin, unlike any circulated piece he had ever seen. He consulted old reference books. Nothing matched exactly. He checked online forums and databases, hunting through error lists. The 1998 quarter wasn't known for errors. It wasn't even particularly collectible. Yet here it was in his hand, defying categorization. He sent photos to a few numismatists. One dismissed it as a trick of lighting. Another recommended having it graded. Eventually, a well-respected coin expert responded with interest and a little urgency. They suggested he send the coin for authentication. Weeks passed. Then the envelope arrived. It was slabbed, labeled, and inside was a formal designation. 1998 quarter obverse double die, experimental finish. The term, experimental finish, set off murmurs across coin forums and enthusiast circles. Some speculated that the coin might have been struck on a planchet intended for the upcoming 1999 proof sets, which used a matte finish unlike anything seen in circulation. The doubling on the obverse suggested a die variety previously undocumented. No one could confirm with absolute certainty how many of these existed, but the consensus settled on one word, rare. At first, Robert's coin was estimated at a few $100s, a curiosity for those intrigued by pre-state quarter oddities. But then other examples began surfacing. One appeared in Texas, another in Ohio. Each shared the same strange satin surface, slight strike weakness, and minor doubling. Word spread. Prices climbed. The market, which had ignored the 1998 quarter for years, suddenly shifted. Collectors who had never looked twice at that year were now checking their boxes, rolls, and junk silver piles. At auction, one piece crossed the $2,000 mark. Then $5,000. A frenzy began brewing as the term, transitional error, attached itself to the anomaly. This wasn't merely a flawed coin. It was a clue, a breadcrumb from the mint's quiet prelude to the state quarter era. What if, they asked, this coin had been part of a secret run? A testing phase for presses and die calibrations that never saw public record? The theory gained traction. A small batch of quarters struck with modified blanks or altered press pressure. Possibly unintentional. Possibly a test. The mint, for its part, declined to confirm any such experiment. But the numismatic silence only deepened the mystery. Rumors hinted that someone inside had recognized the coin and quietly confirmed its legitimacy as an off-record production error. The value fluctuated over the next few years. As with any discovery, initial hype inflated prices. Some collectors overpaid. Others underappreciated what they had. But then a twist added fuel to the fire. In 2021, a well-known coin researcher published a technical breakdown of one such 1998 quarter. Using advanced imaging, they revealed tiny die-polish lines that matched known dies from the 1999 Delaware quarter series. The implication was stunning. The coin had been struck using prototype dies, or at the very least, on a line intended for Delaware quarters. This revelation linked the 1998 era quarter not just to an oddity, but directly to the birth of the most ambitious coin program in U.S. history. Suddenly, what had been a niche curiosity became a keystone. Collectors of state quarters now wanted it. Error hunters wanted it. Registry set competitors wanted it. The coin no longer stood in isolation. It was the missing prelude to a national narrative. Prices jumped again. In one private sale, a certified MS-67 specimen sold for $12,000. Another crossed $20,000. Then came the record-setting moment. An MS-68 specimen, verified with both the doubling and the satin-like finish, surfaced at a major auction house. Expectations were cautious. Error coins were unpredictable. But the atmosphere in the room felt different. Bidding climbed steadily, fueled by phone and online competitors. The hammer fell at $37,500. The room went quiet for a moment. And then the realization set in. A 1998 quarter, born in a year most collectors skipped over, had become a crown jewel. Years later, Robert would speak about the day he bought that coin, not with triumph, but with wonder. He hadn't set out to discover anything. He had just trusted his eye, his curiosity, and the way the light hit a quarter at the right angle. As for the coin itself, its physical traits remained modest to the untrained eye. A soft finish. Slight rim weakness. Obverse doubling visible only under magnification. No wild misstrike. No missing elements. Just a calm, steady deviation from the norm, like a whisper in a crowded room. It asks you to look closer. To this day, no official confirmation exists of how many such quarters were minted or how they entered circulation. Theories range from under 100 to several hundred, with some guessing that only a dozen exist in top mint state condition. But the true number may never be known. What is certain, however, is that one quarter in 1998 chose a different path. It escaped unnoticed through vending machines, cashier drawers, and pocket change, carrying with it the unspoken story of a mint preparing for change, and the serendipity of a collector who stopped to look twice. And its value today? Quietly sitting just under $40,000, with experts predicting it may cross $50,000 if another near-perfect specimen ever appears again.